Hello everyone, this is Menz here. I'm going to be playing the UDES 3 here on Winterberg. Now, basically I'm going to be showing you two different matches here. I'm going to start out with a loss. However, in both of these matches, same map, same side. I do two different things here. I get top damage in both matches, but I'm going to talk about, the differences that you can do to basically, give yourself a better chance to win, and also essentially playing this tank to its strengths rather than kind of racking up useless damage in it. Since basically the UDES 3 here, it's mixed reviews depending on who kind of talk to, whether it's a good tank or not. Basically, it's just all firepower. It's it doesn't have any armor. The mobility on it is good, forward and reverse, but it basically is all about its gun. Basically, the gun on it is 390 damage gun, which is comparable to a charioteer. And also, basically, I'm going to compare it to the Borsig as well. Now, I'm trying to set up here to begin with. This is one of my earlier matches in the UDES, and I'm still kind of getting the hang of it at this point. So I think why don't I set up here in the north, and basically try to help out the main group of tanks I have here. What I've kind of figured out about this tank though is, from me setting up here, or even I'm eventually going to go up here, most of the enemies I'm going to see are within the maximum view range circle, which people can spot me when I shoot, and also within my view range. So essentially every time I'm going to shoot at people, I have a very good chance of being spotted, unless they're like a Russian heavy tank, something with low HP. It's something that's not very good for the UDES. It's like looking at it, if it's behind a hill and someone's trying to shoot up at you, it is a small target. However, you only have 20 millimeters of armor, so in this match, fortunately no SPGs, but SPGs can basically delete you in one hit, and basically anything that hits you is going to penetrate, unlike the tier 9 and 10 that have a little bit more armor going for them and can soak up some shots, specifically the 10. I'm going to keep letting this match go here. But comparing the UDES, essentially it's most comparable to the Borsig Charioteer at tier 8 as far as tank destroyers go. When you're looking at their stats, it's not all cut and dry, because a lot of the stats you find online outside of the official World of Tanks website, they don't take into account siege mode, which basically gives a slight boost to the reload time and also a boost to as far as accuracy goes and the aiming time. Now, at this point, the IS-3 is pushing into me. He most likely spotted me. I don't have Sixth Sense on this, but more or less, I'm not exactly, I'm not too happy with my spot here. But this is one of my earlier matches, and I'm trying to make this thing work. Siege mode is clunky, which the reason why you want to try to find spots where you can set up where you're not going to be seen by enemies is basically resetting up each time you're potentially spotted, or when you get spotted from firing. You're going to have to spend quite a bit of time getting back into the position, which hurts your DPM. Now, one of the things that UDES does not have over other tier 8 TDs, in siege mode, since you're usually not going to fire outside of siege mode, you have a base rate of 2,271 damage per minute. Now, when you compare that to the Charioteer, which has a 390 damage gun as well, that has 2,416. So you're a little bit lower, not by much, but a little bit under 1 round per minute. And then if you compare it to the Borsig TD, which has 490 damage with the 12.8 centimeter gun, that has a little over 2,600. So more or less, you have the least amount of DPM compared to those guys, which this thing looks ridiculous at times if you're looking at it outside. of sniper view if you're in siege mode. But what the UDES has over those two tanks, it has 288 millimeters of penetration. Both the Borsig and Charioteer, has a bit less. They still have very good penetration. 268 for the Charioteer, 246 for the Borsig. That's with standard rounds. So essentially, you're trading a little bit of DPM for penetration, and your accuracy in siege mode improves to 0.25, which is easily better by both of them. And the aiming time isn't bad as well. The aiming time drops to 1.5 seconds. So essentially, you take the RNG, I like to say, out of any gun when you're in siege mode from tier 8 to 10, and basically the misses more or less are all going to be on you. Now at this point, I have a little over 1800 damage. My team is clearly losing, and I spent about half the match trying to get shots on people, but not being able to because I was fighting more so with the tank than I was enemies. Every shot I've gotten on enemies, I'm fairly sure I damaged every single time, but in between getting those shots, I kind of had to fumble around with siege mode and try to figure out how to actually get shots on people without being killed, spotted, and actually being able to get my gun on them. Now, this thing is pinpoint accurate, and at this point we haven't lost, but it's almost guaranteed us to lose here. And setting up here really, it can work only if your allies push very hard and keep the enemies back from spotting you. And there is chances to get up in this area, which I don't particularly do, because a lot of times trying to boost yourself up there and spend time doing that does more harm than good. At this point, fighting outside of siege mode is pretty difficult to do. It does take a little bit of time to get out of it, and once they closed in on me here, I'm virtually dead on arrival. Yeah, unfortunately, I did do the most amount of damage on my team here, but it wasn't exactly the most useful damage, because while I was trying to get shots off, basically my team was taking damage, and I wasn't able to help them and use the full amount of my DPM, which is already a little bit lower, which lowers it even more, and you're not really doing as much as you probably could, even though you get a lot of damage from it. So the end game screens here, starting out, we have a defeat, of course, and then switching over to the next image here, most amount of damage on my team by a fair amount, but was it really useful? Not so much. And then finally, I do make some credits, since this thing can pump out damage, and you don't need to use premium rounds, which always helps. But unfortunately, it's not always the most useful damage. So let me get going this second replay here. Same map, same side. I take a little bit different approach to this tank. Like, granted, you have to take it with a grain of salt because it's different teams and a different match. So, who knows if this would have worked setting up somewhere different. So let's just get this going here. Alright, so there we go. Alright, so this, like I said, this is going to be the same map, same side of course, and this match turns into a Mastery Badge First Class High Caliber Award. I do easily the most amount of damage in the match, up from mid 3000s in the last match to 5400 here, and I set up in a little bit different spot. I do get spotted, I think, a couple times, but at that point they had already suffered enough losses trying to push that far into me. Alright, so let's get things going here. Essentially, like I was talking about, this side, it goes really with any map, not just this map specifically. The fighting's going to be a lot closer up here, and there are a couple areas that you could set up to try to get shots in, but you're very limited. So the next time I got this map, which was this match here, fortunately I'm like, I'm going to try something different. I see a lot of people kind of camping up, high up on the hill here in a lot of tanks, and it simply does not work for most of them. However, it's not a bad, idea in practice, primarily because the way the streets line up here, you can get shots very easily into this side of town from setting up here, but it's not really useful for every single tank. Like sometimes you see heavy tanks up here where you see, TDs with decent camouflage but not great, and they just get spotted and killed essentially. So I'm gonna make my way over here. As you can tell, I do not go up in this area because I was like, oh, how the hell do I get up here? It's like sometimes you even see people way up here, which, does provide different shots, but I end up setting, I believe, a little bit over here on the right. Now, essentially, my team, pausing it here, sets up pretty much the same as the last match, which is why I am kind of tying these together. Yes, it's, a different makeup, and there are a lot of tier 9s compared to the last match here. Last match was only tier 8, if I'm not mistaken. But however, the majority of my team heads up north. We have a couple people in the town, pretty much the same as, the last match, the way that works out. But setting up over here, I'm not too well versed with the shots over here, to be honest. I'm trying to basically show what I'm saying here. Usually I use the free cam mode in a replay. More or less though, setting up here, I wasn't too sure, if I was going to be able to, get great shots because maybe the enemy is going to push the center, the north, who knows. But at this point, we only have a couple tanks here for me to kind of help protect. And I kind of zip over with the very good reverse, the reverse speed. And this Tiger one at this point, I'm going to take off, easy 423 damage. But setting up here, they're just outside of my maximum view range. Once I kind of figure that out, and I'm going to do my best to keep them, basically once they get within the green, almost guaranteed that they're going to spot me. But there is that little gray area that some heavy tanks can't exactly spot to unless they have very good crew skills and also equipment like optics on to be able to get that maximum view range. Outside of, once you start getting closer to, most 9s and 10s, they can reach that maximum pretty easy. But the camouflage on this is very good. Even while firing, you do retain a little bit of camouflage that helps you out. But at this point, I'm able to help, these guys in front of me. And unlike the last match, I got myself in a spot where there's not a lot of terrain in between me and the enemy, and I have clear shots on them for a pretty wide distance. Now I'm trying to keep an eye on the center too, because if the center falls, the same thing. This guy's just on that vision where I'm starting to get worried if he's going to spot me. I don't have Sixth Sense on this yet, but fortunately he wasn't able to see me, and I get him to kind of back off there. Had they continued to push, this would have ruined that spot. But luckily, with the 288 millimeters of penetration, pretty easy to penetrate. Even this E75, I'm not too concerned about. But it's pretty easy to penetrate tanks with this thing, unless you're shooting at extremely tough armor or very angled armor. But at this point, our team's tied. Our north, has won a bit of ground, but, they're going to be hard-pressed to push any further than they are now. This IS-3 is pushing up, so I'm just going to back up slowly, trying to keep him out of, the maximum, or not the maximum view range, but basically where I'm worried that he's going to spot me. But the enemy is, pushing pretty hard into town. They have more tanks than we do here. If you, don't take me into a factor. But more or less, playing a tank like this doesn't just go for the UDES. Like the Charioteer, the Borsig, and, lightly armored TDs that have fairly accurate guns, trying to use this approach definitely helps out. Figuring out where on a map that you can set up to help your team even though this is the weak flank, I was able to find a spot here that's, giving me very good shots. And for the enemy to push in, like, he finally spots me here. He just crosses that green line, and he has a little bit better V range than, say, an IS-3, depending on the equipment that he's using. However, at this point, I switch over to premium APCR, which, gives you a modest increase, but I just wanted that guy dead. Because it's still, we're up by 1 tank with that E75 out, but it's still, not a guaranteed win here. But more or less, the UDES, like, I know it's not going to be for everybody. You have to really understand camouflage, and more importantly than actually knowing how to shoot and damage tanks, because this takes a lot of that out of the equation with its penetration and accuracy in siege mode. You have to know vision. If you're going to get spotted in this a lot, or like the first match, even though I did the most amount of damage, I didn't help my team win. You're going to be hard pressed to do well if you're getting spotted a lot in this, don't have very good shots in the positions that you take up in, and you're kind of fighting the tank more so than the enemy. But, this does begin a good starting point for the tier 9 and 10 to come. Armor-wise, this doesn't do you any favors. You're going to take damage every single shot. But even with the low DPM, sometimes it kind of equals out, because with that penetration leg up you have over the other tier 8 TDs, and the accuracy, you can pretty much penetrate the vast majority of the shots that you take. It's like the E75, I think I bounced one, but I shot him in pretty much the toughest part of his armor there. Because at that point I was, a little bit, I guess you could say cocky. Like, I can damage him, but I also bounced off the IS-3 doing the same thing. As you see, I don't carry any HE in this tank. Usually I carry at least 1 or 2 HE rounds, but this is one of the few tanks I don't carry any in. But considering, the difficulty to play this tank, it's not recommended for everybody, but it is a very fun tank if you play it to its strengths. There are a couple maps, like Himmelsdorf, Ensk, which are very small, and it's virtually impossible to set up where people can't see you outside of the very beginning. If you set up behind like the strongest flank, and say on Himmelsdorf they happen to be either on a hill or on the train yard, or Ensk you happen to be like in counter mode and you're on the field side. Outside of those, like, there are specific maps, and depending on the match, it might be impossible for you to really play the tank to your liking. However, you still have very good mobility forward and backwards. Unlike most tanks, this tank can travel fairly quickly in reverse. As you see, I bounced off of that tier 9. The tier 9 and 10, outside of guns over or at 122 millimeters, they can surprisingly bounce the majority of shots thrown at them, specifically the tier 10. But I do have a weak spot guide up for the tier 10. It does go over how to kind of deal with those tanks a little bit. But in this match, I do a little over 5,000 damage as far as what this is spotted. What's spotted here. It doesn't count everything. And basically I get one more shot in, kind of blind firing a tank there. I'm pretty sure that was, one of my first shots where I blind fired. Alright, so moving to the end game screens here. We have a victory, mastery badge first class, high caliber award. Easily the most amount of damage on my team here, and even on the enemy team. And then finally, the most detailed screen. I shoot 20 times, I hit 18 of them, and surprisingly I penetrate 14. Usually in this tank you hit almost all of them, like I did, 18 out of 20, and you penetrate basically every single shot. 14 out of 20 is still not bad considering the amount of damage. And I do a little over 5,400 at 5,452. I only take 2 shots, and I assist with 672. Something with this tank, other tanks, where even if you're low tier, say in a medium, it works for virtually any tank. If you're looking to kind of, it's not really inflating your stats, or it's not something that's bad. try aiming for the frontal track wheel. If you have a high rate of fire gun too, if you're trying to do that first and you know a lot of or allies are aiming at them, track the opponent. That way you start racking up assist damage, which even though you're not spotting an enemy, say if you're playing further back like this, tracking them, then you start doing damage to them, you're going to rack up more overall damage that way, getting track assist damage plus doing damage. It's one of those things that you can easily overlook, but it is something that really bumps up your overall, you know, combined damage and helps you get, you know, marks of excellence and also mastery badges like ace tankers. But anyway, hopefully you enjoyed this video. You know, I'm trying to do a little bit more in-depth videos outside of my live streams here. But if you haven't caught my live stream before, I live stream here on YouTube, you know, several times a week. You can find it on my main channel page, and also at the end of this video is a kind of a past broadcast, excuse me, of one of my live streams. Feel free to subscribe too. It'll, you know, send you alerts if you would like for my live streams and also my videos here. Otherwise, check out my website, wattguru.com, for weak spot guides, map strategies, tank guides, and a little bit more as far as like specific articles go. Anyway, thank you. Have a nice day. Hopefully I'll see you sometime soon on another video. Goodbye.